Mark, hello, welcome to the show.
Hey, Podge, how are you?
I'm fantastic. Very, very grateful that our mutual friend Jess introduced us.
Yes, the legend.
Absolute legend. I was saying that to you earlier that she wasn't. I didn't see her on social media for the longest time, and then she popped up and said, "Hey, like you should connect with Mark. He's a great guy." She spoke incredibly highly of you, and I know that we've met previously to this podcast, and like fully agree. So I'm beyond excited to be able to lean on your expertise, like as a strategist, as a coach, as a leader as well. And I do really want to dive in to the topic around hope. I know it's something that you're really passionate about. If you think back to maybe your childhood in Northern Ireland, and then I'd love to know what did hope maybe look like then for you, and then how has that evolved?
I grew up in Northern Ireland and in the times when it was, we had the Troubles. So Irish to say, like, we had a civil war, but we called it the Troubles. The bad trouble, It was dark enough looking back. I remember growing up as a child and I lived beside a range of hills, mountains. And I remember just looking over them and going, I wonder what's on the other side of those mountains. Like even from like a 6 or 7 year old kid. And I always thought someday I'm going to go and see what's on the other side. So I was always very hopeful that I could get there. I could travel and see that. And then I just remember in Northern Ireland that things were bad. Like they really were bad. You turned the TV on every night and someone was murdered. Policeman was murdered, soldier was murdered, terrorist was murdered, innocent people were blew up. And you just thought, how could this get better? It was really interesting because you just seen politicians that were playing the game and very few people seemed to think that it could get better. However, it did. You know what I mean? So it did get better. And now we have a relative stable peace in Northern Ireland. Interestingly, Northern Ireland, during the worst of the Troubles, was still the lowest crime rate in Western Europe, still one of the safest places. And it still is one of the safest places to live in Western Europe. As I got older, I realized that actually things can change. Things will and can change if one or more people start to believe it can. If one or more people start to have a bit of hope. And that's what we've seen. And, a few heroes of mine, I've never met them, but I read about them a few times and I think I put them in my book. Yeah, I did. I put them in the book. It was a group of old ladies who walked across Belfast every night. Sorry, I think it was every Wednesday night. And they went and prayed in a wee hall down at the Belfast Docks. So they prayed and they prayed for peace. I always think, those ladies probably came through, it was after tea time, they'd watched the news, someone else was murdered, someone else was dead. Things weren't great. But they had the hopeful perspective that things could change and they prayed and things change. And I just always then I've been interested in people who live with hope around the world. And I've been fortunate enough to be in enough contexts where I found people that have hope. The idea of hope is just so fascinating for me. And then I've just the last few years I've been writing about it. I research, I do all these sorts of training and I coach one-on-ones and help people just gather a sense of realistic hope. But again, it's hope is something that's within us. In the classic Greek myth, we've heard of Pandora's box. Well, it's actually a jar. Pandora opened the jar, releasing death and all other challenges of human life. She closed it again as quickly as she could, with one remaining human attribute inside it, and that was hope. So, however bad things are in our lives, however bad things are in the world, there's always hope, Podge. There's always hope.
When we say hope, when I was doing a bit of research, like there's a lot of different definitions that tend to come up from all different parts of life. The simple belief the future can be better
Yeah.
than the present. Like what role do we play? There's like psychological concepts. I came across Snyder's hope theory, which means it's goals plus pathways plus
Yeah.
agency. How would you define hope?
For me, it's a realistic hope. The future isn't set in stone, and it's neither negative or positive. So we create the future. So it's how we're working today to create a future for tomorrow and what that looks like in terms of our posture. And for me, it's we can see recent studies that indicate like directing even our thoughts towards the positive, towards hope, results in the frontal cortex. Because I've been a bit of a nerd these few years, like studying brain science and all. I love brain science and how we can change the shape of our brain. And this is so important for us to know. Like a lot of people don't know this, that we can actually start to change the shape of our brain. But just directing our thoughts result in the frontal cortex communicating with like subcortical regions in our deep in our brain that have been around since the first human being. That can connect with hope. That can connect with our ancestors who survived famines and wars and all these different things and trials and tribulations. So we as human beings, we're built for hope. We're built for hope. that we can last and we can survive. So hope is within us.
Yeah, I share that kind of passion. The brain, the more podcasts I do, the brain is fascinating. And I think the two that come up a lot for me is the amygdala is essentially like the emotional part. So it's almost like the fight or flight response. And then the prefrontal cortex you're talking about is almost like how do we rationalize our emotions? It's kind of that side of the brain where we can take a pause and think. And if we're able to do that, like you said, using a positive mindset or an optimistic or hopeful mindset too, it's crazy that you actually can rewire your brain that way.
I know. And if you look at, I use PQ intelligence. You can Google PQ intelligence. It's a coaching methodology, and it looks at the sage and saboteur. It's based in brain science, so you can actually see for yourself what your default behavior is in terms of if something happens to you. You know, so say something happens to you that's pain, you become more negative, you become more cynical, or else you become a wee bit hopeful. You say, well, what can I learn from this? What new knowledge, inspiration, strength can I gain from this pain? And we can see that. You know, and one of my heroes is Gordon Wilson. From 1987, we had the Enniskillen bomb. So Gordon Wilson was there on Remembrance Day, 1987, in Enniskillen. He was there with his daughter, who was a nurse, trainee nurse, when a bomb exploded. And the bomb buried the two of them under 6 feet of rubble. And he said to the BBC right after his daughter had died and been through this terrible bomb, one of the worst tragedies of the Troubles, he described his last conversation with her. He says, she held my hand tightly and gripped me as hard as she could. And she said, Daddy, I love you very much. And those were the exact words to me. And those were the last words I ever heard her say. And then Gordon Wilson did something that I think probably changed the direction of the Troubles as well. And also stopped us from tipping over into complete chaos, you know. He said on TV, I bear no will, I bear no grudge. Dirty sort of talk is not going to bring her back to life. She was a great wee lassie. She loved her profession. She was a pet. She's dead. She's in heaven, and we shall meet again. And I will pray for these men tonight and every night. And there's a historian called Jonathan Barden, and he said, no words in more than 25 years of violence in Northern Ireland had such a powerful emotional impact. You know, and again, it's taking pain and it's say, right, this pain tells us that something's going wrong. And then it's, how can that pain be a gift? So for any of the folks that are listening to this or watching it, don't know, Gordon Wilson went on to be a senator in the Irish Parliament. He went on to set up many different types of charities that impact the lives of young people in peace and reconciliation projects, both in Ireland and across the world. He used his pain. He figured out what new knowledge, inspiration, and strength he could take from that to do good in the world. And he was, you know, he was just an amazing person. You know, if we put our hand in a stove and we feel that pain of a stove, what do? We take our hand off, don't we? But everybody, including me and you, will know that when we feel emotional pain, what do? We
Yeah.
just keep on with it. We keep on with it, you know. So it's knowing that pain and saying, right, what can I learn? What can I learn from what's just happened to me? What new strength, wisdom, inspiration can I learn? You know, what new hope can I gain from this experience that I've had?
I have a lot of kind of questions to feed off that. There's a lot of different directions I think I can go. I think the first one is just acknowledging with that example and what you've said earlier, right? You've experienced times like the Troubles. I know you wrote your book, Healthy Rhythms for Leaders, during the global pandemic as well. And there's just a lot of uncertain times in the world. So using that example, like what are the hopeful threads you think that you've seen people cling to during those times?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Hope sometimes doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense when everything else can be bad. I think within the micro, sometimes we might not feel too hopeful as individuals, especially if we've got really dodgy politicians, which we always seem to have dodgy politicians, don't we? Everywhere I've lived, is politicians a politician. You know, if things, the economy isn't going well, if relationships isn't going well, if, you know, all these things we get, it has an impact on it. And you're like, how can you be hopeful and among all this negativity? However, I just find there's something in the macro. So we go big, we go global. We know that less people are being killed in wars than has ever been. We know that people are living longer than ever. We know maternal deaths are the lowest they've ever been. We know more people have access to water than have ever had. We know more children in education. As a species, as human beings, we're doing so much good in the world. We're bringing so much hope in the world. So I think there is a part where when you do feel a wee bit crap, when you do think, I don't like this job. I don't like this relationship. I don't feel much hope. I mean, the news at the moment, the news is going out of its way to make us take the hope from us. Like it's these news editors are doing everything they can to drain us of hope. There's just something of thinking in the macro, just thinking the macro. And the fact that also where I see at the moment, and I wish more people would believe me, we have never been in a better time in human history to influence the world with hope. We have the internet now. We're the first generation to live with the internet. We have so much potential to influence the world with hope and good messages. So for me, my heart is that the positive people in the world would start to be louder than the negative people. We know that as human beings, yet we have that power to be positive. And I think we talked about this before. I just think that we don't realize that in 20 years' time, people are going to say, really, that's what you used the internet for? Like to put a weird comment on someone's post. The potential to bring hope and goodness to the world is and communicate and make visible your message exists in a way that never existed before. And there's a good book called New Power, Old Power by two Australians. And they go into that because they look at it how movements can happen in the internet age in a way, for good or bad. And we definitely see enough bad movements across the world. But there's the power of the internet to bring hope to the world is just incredible at the minute.
It's almost ironic that you say that too, that you want the positive to outweigh the negative. But in general, with like the algorithms and stuff, almost they promote the extremes, often the negative extremes. If you're just scrolling online or scrolling through Twitter or X or anything like that, it's those kind of sensationalist headlines or comments. So in a way, it's kind of driving the opposite behavior.
Yeah. And, I think another thing that we need to realize that, again, I'm just a bit of a nerd because I do research in this area. We are the algorithm. We actually are the algorithm. Like we are. Like we create our algorithms online. And that's something that, I only realized maybe a couple of years ago. The content that's getting put, if we Google, I don't know, we Google podcast speakers, guess what? You know what happens? Like your feed's full of podcast speakers and all the equipment and so on. So we create our algorithm. So we, all these folks sitting in their bedroom being weird, like Googling conspiracy theories, it starts to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think as well we need as human beings to realize that we create our algorithms. For kids, parents with kids using technology, like we need to know that these technology firms exist to make money. That's why they exist. They might pretend they care about your child's safety and everything, but they exist to make money. That's what they exist. I heard Roblox, the guy CEO from Roblox on TV this morning, and he was saying, and the lady was like, I've got an 11-year-old child, and she's like, he gets all these weird things and all, and he says, yeah, but we do our best, we do our best. And for me, it's like, whoa, like we don't get it. I know parents of children who have got like really dodgy things happen to them on Roblox. We've got this world of the internet. We've got these algorithms. We've got this stuff coming to us, but we also sometimes I don't think we realize that we create our own algorithms, by the stuff that we consume.
That is important that we have some sort of agency within that as well. And like you said, we could look in 20, 30 years time and be like almost like caveman times in terms of the internet. Like, why were you using it that way? Like it was so archaic.
I know. I've spent a couple of years traveling back and forward to Australia, doing some work, just commuting. Like they've brought in laws for kids under 16 not to have access to social media. It's funny because you go to there and you listen to and talk to a few policymakers and politicians, and they're like, that just makes sense, doesn't it? And then you come to Europe and UK and Ireland, and people are actually debating this, and I'm like, yeah, actually, it does make sense to keep our kids safe. It does make kids to sense to realize that this new technology that our brains aren't used to it yet. Maybe we need to be a wee bit more careful. But another thing, like with hope as well, it's really interesting. There just seems to be purpose. There seems to be purpose. Purpose is tied to hope. So I've met hopeful people. Of another book that I'm hoping bringing out maybe later this year, and it's going to be called probably Realistic Hope. And I list case studies of people with hope, and I look at them and I think, well, why are they hopeful? So one guy, Zach, friend of mine, was in Montreal, and he worked with a homeless shelter, and his purpose was to make the lives of these men and women, and sometimes young people, better. So he loved this environment. He loved it. His purpose was not in the amount of money. You know yourself, like in the caring world and carers and people like that, and people who work in charities, they're not usually doing it for the money, but they've got a deep purpose. I remember another lady that I noted, I didn't use her name. I was in Zambia a few years ago, 2009. You know, I've always, if you listen to my podcast, I always say what brings you hope. So I said, this lady, what brought her hope? The context of it was I was visiting with this midwife. There was these community leaders and was meeting with them. And then I started talking to this lady and she brought me in her house, a cup of tea and so on. It was lovely. And her house was basic enough, you know, and she had AIDS and she was living with HIV. And she said that I think it was either her sister or brother and the wife or husband had died. So she just had the three kids and she was doing everything she could to rear them properly. And I says, what gives you hope? She says, well, what gives me hope is the medicine, you know, the ARVs, medicine you take for HIV, because they allow me to live a productive life that I can create a future for the kids. And I was like, whoa. I was just like, well, what are you fearful of at the minute? And I think I wrote it at the time, you know, well, I'm fearful that the Western countries will stop, you know, supplying the drugs. You know, they're like $1 a day they cost. Like I remember writing at the time on one of my blogs, I had a fear that the populist movement across the world would spread because of the economic collapse, you know, when we'd start to blame everybody else apart from the people who did it. Unfortunately, like what I seen it's happened, you know, so the UK government a couple of weeks ago they're going to spend so much more on defence, and which is grand. However, they've cut the overseas aid budget, and what I thought then was that lady, you know, that lady just trying her best to live her best life and to live her purposeful life for her kids and nieces and nephews, and I was just like, well, that's unfair, you know. So there seems to be hope and purpose. There seems to be some hopeful people have a purpose. I don't know if I've ever met a hopeful person that doesn't have a purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, what's the concept? Like you're very intentionally putting the word realistic when you said that your book could be realistic hope.
Yeah.
Why did you use the word realistic?
I think the future is, I say, it's neither negative or positive. And I think that it might not work. I think there's something called scenario thinking, which I use with organizations, where you try different scenarios. You try something. So you want a different career. You're hopeful that you can get a different job and have a different career. However, you might have to try 2 or 3 more jobs or careers to see if you get something that you want to do. You know, I coached someone last year and they really didn't like their job. And I said, what do you want to do? He said, I just want a new job. What do you want to do? Told me what they wanted. I said, what do you think would happen if you put in 50 applications to a job that you know that you wanted? So they put in 10 applications and got a job. It's being a realistic hope of knowing that you're hopeful for the future, but there's also steps to put in to know the future is neither negative or positive. You create the future and that we live, that hope is in between our ears. That hope doesn't make, you know, if we, God forbid, if we died tomorrow and they did an autopsy and cut our brain off in half, you know, they couldn't say, oh, well, there's the hope. So the hope is something intangible. It's somewhere else and it's between our ears and it's how we perceive the world, you know, so it's a realistic hope. And it's knowing that, you know, sometimes life will be good, sometimes bad. I can tell you a fable, a Chinese fable, which I think sums it up well. So there's this Chinese farmer, and he has this great horse that wins this great race, makes him a pound or two. And his neighbours say to him, "Whoa, you must be so happy. You must be so hopeful. You know, the horse is doing so well." And he was like, "That could be good or it could be bad." So he says, "Right." So next week, the horse runs off. And the neighbour says to him, "Oh, that's disappointing. It must be terrible for you that you've lost a horse worth all that money." He says, "Ah, it could be good or it could be bad." And then a week later, the bold horse comes back with a few fillies in its wake. So it brings a few female horses back with it. And the neighbour says, "Oh, that's amazing. That's incredible. It's brought, you've got the horse back plus a few fillies. You must be so happy." And he's like, "Well, it could be good or it could be bad." And then the next week, lots happened in this Chinese farmer's life. The next week, the Chinese farmer's son falls off the horse and breaks his leg. And the neighbour says, "Oh, that's awful. You know, that's terrible." And the farmer says it could be good or it could be bad. And then the next week, their war breaks out in their area and the army come looking for the son. But he can't go because he's got a broken leg. And the neighbour says, "You must be so delighted." And the Chinese farmer says it could be good or it could be bad. And I think that's what realistic hope is. It's knowing that it could be good or it could be bad. There's two sides to a coin. And if you think it's bad, it's probably bad. And if you think it's good, it's probably good. And it's finding that. And also, like I said at the start, hope comes from something deep inside us that has kept us going as human beings. So I think there's an ability to garnish that. However, we have to want to do that. We have to want to do that.
This is maybe a slight tangent on what you're saying. There's a few things standing out to me. One, it's about having that realistic, you said realistic hope, but almost a realistic expectation too, that sometimes things won't go exactly the way you want it to go. So if you use the example with the job, the person applying for the job, if he was like, this is the job I want, and was like tunnel vision, this is it, and then for some reason didn't get it, might be out of their control. There might have been a candidate more suited to the role as well. And if you're just have all your eggs in that I'm getting this job basket, you're almost setting yourself up for failure in a way. But the way you propositioned it, why not apply for 10 jobs? Why not see what happens? You might get it, you might not get it. So there is hope there, but there's also that expectation that, okay, I didn't get it. Like, I was aware this was obviously a possibility. Where do I go from here? There's a fine line. I think we do that to an extent in everyday life. I love the kind of parable example as well, or the proverb, because that to me is like external. If you can look at external validation too, right? If that person with the horse was just like, oh, thank you so much for those really kind words, I really appreciate. And if you're, oh, I want more of that, I want more people to tell me how great my horse is or how great I'm doing as well, it can set you up for failure in a way too, right? Because then you might have the negative side of it too, people being negative towards you. And do you take that extra harsh? I think naturally we tend to take negative sentiments and ruminate on a more than perhaps positive ones as well. But it's
Yeah.
interesting to have that kind of more balanced
Yeah.
mindset versus relying on external validation, or versus putting all your eggs in one basket too.
And I do a lot of that around my coaching and leadership training and stuff, like if you're leading any type of change in an organization, you've got about 2% of the people who will always say yes and 2% of the people who will always say no to everything. Women are 7% inside those, so they might say yes and they might say no. And then you've got 70 whatever percent who will do whatever. They don't really care. They'll do whatever you want to do. Now, who do we go to for validation? We go to 2% of the yes people to make us feel better. And who do we lie awake at night worrying about? 2% of the no people. So there is, and I've trained myself, and I do a lot of work with people I work, training to ignore criticism and praise. The praise can be as damaging as the criticism, because you can just go to praise for your validation. So just having that ability to ignore the praise and ignore the criticism, and then having an ability just to know your why, like your why is bigger than anything else. So you'll still feel fearful. You'll always be fearful. However, using that hope to create a why of I'm so for me, it's helping leaders thrive. I help leaders thrive. That's what I do. That's my big why in life. And I can't tell you how much I've been blessed by that. That's what I do. That's why I show up in the world. And I don't really care if someone thinks I'm great or I'm not great. And I mean that in a really like neutral way, because I'm not going to be defined by what someone else thinks of me. So it's having that ability to know where your why is and how you're centered to help yourself move forward. It's a huge strength that, to learn whether you're 5-year old or 50-year old, to know that you have equal ability to anyone else. You can do what you set your mind to do. However, you take full responsibility and accountability for that at the same time.
What strategies or tips do you provide people to help them to have that neutral stance, to not relay too much or rely too much on positive feedback, or not to feel too down when they receive negative feedback?
It's interesting how much we do as human beings. I would break it down and start to ask, why does it matter? Like, why does it matter if someone thinks you're great? Why does it matter if you've got a really good position title, or you're a president of this, or I've coached politicians, I've coached journalists. Why does it matter if you're a New York Times journal? Like, why does that matter to you? What does that add to you? What does that mean? And when people start to understand that, we start to look at the labels that other people give us from around the world, and that create status for us. But the danger for that is you can wake up when you're 60 or 70 and realize you haven't lived the life that you wanted to live. So if you could wake up tomorrow morning and have your perfect day, what would it look like? What would you be doing? If you could do your perfect role that could get you a pound or two, what would it look like? And then we start to shape around that vision of what they would be doing, And again, it's just mad. I would work with CEOs and people like that who, on the outside, are doing really well, but they've lived a life where they haven't really wanted to do that. It's that focus of knowing, what am I here for? Jess puts it really well. Jess says we make a contract. We make a contract with God before we're sent here, and our role is to live out that contract. And I love that she said, and for me, it's a wee bit like that. Like, what's that unique thing about Podge? What is that unique thing about Podge? We know there's 7 or 8 billion people in the world. We know that we're all uniquely different. It's crazy that we're all uniquely different. However, there's something unique about Podge that makes Podge who he is, that makes him the gift to the world that he is. And then what we do, for me, it has to be, I said earlier about the positive, it has to be people realizing that we show up in the world every day. We bring something to the world and we get to choose. So whenever we started to nail down into that, to really drill down into that especially with leaders, I get to help them reflect in the fact that they are bringing something to their organization every day. They're multiplying something. So what are they multiplying? Are they multiplying kindness, sympathy, generosity? Is it a place where everybody wants to work? We have the whole thing at the minute where quiet quitting and people are leaving jobs and everybody's like trying to look for another job, and then organizations think, oh, why am I not moving forward? But if you start building into an organization, you actually care about people. And that does come from the top. It comes from the leaders. So yeah, I just help people understand what their why is. Sometimes I work with someone and they're already doing it, especially in the caring profession. You get a lot of people in the caring profession who are doing what they love to do. They just need a wee bit of like help around resilience. How they stay resilient in face of a lot of challenging circumstances and adversity and tension and everything else.
There's a few things coming to mind. I love when you're giving the example, you're coaching with leaders, right? Not once have you mentioned their job title. And I think that's speaking to what Jess is saying with the contract with God. There's going to be all this kind of external noise, this thing's kind of pulling you away from your why, potentially knocking you slightly off course to what you believe, what you value. In a way, the other word coming to my mind is like alignment or misalignment. And I think we can fall into that trap very easily, especially in organizational settings where you'd be supporting people too. People can get distracted. They might start chasing the job title or the job with the New York Times as well. And it might be ever so slightly, it might still be a bit related to what they believe in, but then over time you could be way off course. I think if you use an example, if you're trying to set sail from New York to Ireland and you have a compass and the compass is just like 1 or 2 little dials like off, you'll end up in the North Pole where it's just like over time you kind of drift. And I think there's also a concept, you probably do this with organizations, the concept of languishing, which has been really publicized over like the last 5, I'd say since the pandemic, it's really coming out. It's like things aren't too bad. They're not too great either. I'm feeling all right. I like what I do. I don't love what I do. I don't feel like true passion, but it's also not that bad too. I can provide for my family. It's fine. Like, would you have any advice for people who are stuck in languishing as such, where they're not in the terrible spot, but also not in the spot
Yeah.
you potentially want to be in?
Yeah, I actually have something to think about a lot. I only work with people where there's pain. So is that how painful is that? Because again, you can be very judgmental very quickly. If someone's working in a job, it's maybe not that exciting. They doesn't fulfill them that much, but they get enough to get by. They get a wee holiday. They've got a nice. That's okay if there's no pain. There has to be pain. That's why coaching works when there's pain, when you want change, when you know that something's just not in alignment with what it should be. So I would get, like, say, I would get people who come to me and say, hey, we've got like a bunch of leaders. Would you do this work with me, that? And I would say, well, where's the pain? Well, we're trying to create. And I would usually go, no, there's no pain. Because there has to be a pain. There has to be something wrong. You can't innovate perfection. If everything's okay, like, what is it you want to change? Like what, so that person has to come a realization, well, there's their pain. Because we all know people that have done the same job for years and years and they're happy and content out and they're lovely people and everything else, so there's no pain. It's whenever you know that something just doesn't lie right, when you know that something's different and you notice that there's a problem. You might notice there's a problem within yourself. You might notice I work with entrepreneurs, there's a problem in the world. So you start, and then what I do with them is you turn the problem into a question. And that's where design thinking comes in. You start to say, well, I am not feeling fulfilled in my role. What would fulfillment look like for you in your life? So there has to be the pain. And I think that's why big organizations, and especially organizations that were created before the internet, like I see a big difference between organizations created before the internet and after the internet. So before it, there's just a different legacy of organizational memory, and we can see that, say, with the church. Church is just, it's going down and down, the big denominations, but they're unable just to change. Whereas we see maybe companies like yourself, where you work and so on, they're just more adaptable. They're more able to shift and so on. So there has to be pain, whether at a micro level or whether an organization, has to be pain. There has to be something that's just not right, that could be better. And if there's not that, then there's no point really moving forward.
What was the gentleman's name you said again from 1987?
Gordon Wilson.
So if you use Gordon Wilson's example, right, that he had a big traumatic event, right? Like pain is just like basically hitting him in the face. Like that's enough to like, I'm going to take action now because that pain was so harsh. But I know for a lot of people, the pain is more subtle, and we almost live in a world where we're told to suppress any quote unquote bad emotion.
I
So
know,
sometimes we push pain deep, deep down and we mightn't even know we have it. How do you help bring
I
that
know.
out in people that you coach?
I don't know if you've looked at Joseph Campbell much. Joseph Campbell, The Hero of a Thousand Faces. It's one of the key texts of the 20th century. Joseph Campbell, George Lucas from Star Wars says that, he was one of the key influences in his life for Star Wars. So Joseph Campbell writes about all the myths and religions and faiths, that have been since forever. He has a thesis of the hero's journey, and the hero has to go from the un the known world to the unknown world and then go back. So the hero, if you look at any movie, it starts with usually the heroes living a normal life. They're farming, and then something happens. Someone comes in and kills their family, and it takes them on an adventure. You can't go through the process unless something happens to you that's a pain. There's always a pain. There's a part in it where, in the process, and you can Google the hero's journey, and if we had more time, I'd talk about it a lot more because I love it. And I use a lot of it in my work and for myself as well. So there's different stages in it. But for me, there's a crucial stage, the refusal of the call. So Joseph Campbell says in every religion, every faith, every cultural myth, there's a part where the hero has a refusal of the call. I think his words are like, it's a dull thud of the soul. It's a dull thud of the soul. So that dull thud of the soul could last your whole life. Do you have refused your call? So, if you look at any of the sort of hero movies, they end up in the bit where like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it. I don't want to go through this unknown world and go on this adventure. I just want what was there before. And I don't want, even Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane. He was like, and he was Jesus. Like, he was like, take this cup from me. I really don't want to do this. So there's a refusal of the call. And again, it's a dull thud of the soul for our lives. There's a part where we as human beings forever have that choice that we answer the call. And if you look heroes in any type of life or any walk or any sphere of influence, there's a part where they took up the call. They decided to be different, to step out and to do something. So with Gordon Wilson, it was like, he doesn't want to see any more people being killed. He doesn't want to see any more pain and suffering that his family's gone through. So he devotes his life to peace and reconciliation. I did a podcast the other day with people living with dementia. The answer to their call is to help people living with dementia have better, fruitful lives. They had a choice, and they say it on the recording that they had a choice to sit in the house and watch TV, because when they got their dementia diagnosed, but they didn't. They're parts of groups now that meet with other folk who have been diagnosed with dementia, and now they were just saying about much peer support they have, how much it changes their life. It's helped one person keep working their career, So there's that refusal of the call. And, for me personally, like I sit down once a month, and I do a lot of different stuff. I will say, right, where am I refusing in my life? Where is the refusal of my call? And it's really interesting because our ego, again, our status, our sense of self never wants to say that. We never want to say, well, we're refusing. We're going to go, oh, well, I do my best and I do this and I've done that. But if you can admit, or if you can even analyze and take time to say, where am I falling short here? where's the opportunities to me to respond to the call in my life, and wherever that's going to be, it can be life changing. It can be really life changing, and then we see people who do that, who step forward and change and create revolutions, and create rebellions, and create change across the world, and create, you know, come up with cures for diseases. That person at that moment decides, I'm not going to refuse this call anymore. I'm going to go forward.
If you think about your hero's journey, like what would be a call that you didn't refuse, or what stands out for you?
I just love change. So, but there has been times in my life where I've been in like really like comfortable spots, like financially and jobs and stuff that I didn't need to change. So just even started Healthy Rhythms coaching. I was well paid job in England, living outside London, nice lifestyle. And I just realized that I was wanting to do something different. I seen in the pandemic, people really were brought to themselves. Like a lot of who we were was stripped away. We were waking up and spending our day in our jogging bottoms, and our sense of self and prestige and all was like, took away. And I just think, well, I'd love to work with people around rebuilding that back up and helping people see what that looks like. So for me, it was a big jump. And I just jumped and went, started the company full time. If I hadn't have done that, it would have been interesting, because there's so much like has happened since that wouldn't have happened until I made that decision. Like in different ways, I always say to people, like, this podcast, do a podcast. That's my advice to everybody. I've got a friend that reached out to me last night and says, Mark, I took your advice. I'm doing a podcast. A podcast is amazing. I think a podcast is the most powerful way of communicating in today's world. So the fact that you decided that you would do the extra work to do a podcast, create a difference in the world. So my podcast, I don't know if you've wrote books, but I've wrote books now. Writing books is a nightmare. Like, you'll write 10,000 words and 9,000 of them are crap and you delete them. Writing a book is the most, like, it strips you away from everything, writing a book, because it's just, there's nowhere to hide. There's nowhere else to blame. You just have to do it. However, me writing books, me taking the time to do a podcast, me doing all this stuff results in people going, hey, listen, I read your book and I listened to a podcast and I've heard about you. Would you be interested in talking about this? It's always that bit where there's something that you can improve on and that you can do. And I just work hard at it in my own life. I think we joked the other day, when we were talking, like, behind anything, there's always 10,000 hours of work. And it would have been a lot easier for me at many times in my life not to do that work, not to move to all those countries, not to move my boys to like 4 or 5 different school systems. I remember when they were young, someone says to me, oh, your guys are going to be really well rounded when they grow up. I says, yeah, or else completely screwed up. But thankfully, they're well rounded and they've got this sense of resilience. They know when they wake up in the morning and they hear someone saying something that's just a meaning that someone's put to something that might not be the same meaning in a different country. So yeah, so that experience of just traveling, of doing change, has helped me really get to where I am today.
I had Hannah Nash on recently as well, a trainee psychotherapist, and she just stopped her podcast, Greener Fields, but I loved what she said. I was saying, like, would you advise people to do a podcast? And she was like, absolutely. There's a million podcasts out there in the world. There's no podcast out there with you in the world or by you in the world. And I thought that was a really, really nice way to put it. It's kind of like unique that you all have something to offer to the world as well.
And we do. And I think that's the biggest lie of the world, that we don't. And I think teachers, not all teachers, but the education system, the way the world is, it tends to steal our voice. And so many of us, we've got individual, unique voices. And if anybody who's listening to this, I would encourage you to know that someone wants to hear your story. Whoever you are in the world, I want to hear your story. I think I'm a good coach because I love listening. Like, this is funny, I'm doing the talking today, but mostly I listen because I love hearing people's stories. My podcast, the Healthy Rhythm podcast, the premise of it was that I just started recording the stories, the conversations that I've been having my whole life anyway. I've always been asking people what hope looks like and having a crack and having a chat with them. And now I record it and it influences other people. And that's what goes back to what I said, no other generation could ever do that through time, through however long human beings have lived in this world. you're the first that can do it. We're the first people that can do that. Like, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. I do say in my intro as well, and fully believe it. Like everyone has a great and unique story to tell
Sure.
the world.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Mark, in your coaching practice or a coaching model, how do how does gratitude and hope work in harmony?
Yeah, that's a great question. People that I work with, I do like a wee monthly reflection sheet with them. And the first question in my reflection sheet every month is, what are you grateful for? And there's a reason for that. Gratitude drives us. Gratitude keeps us alive. If we weren't grateful, we probably wouldn't. There'd be no reason for us to live. Just recognizing what you're grateful for. And also, there's a bit on down the sheet where it's about challenges, but starting with the gratitude. What are you grateful for today? Gratitude is incredible. It's just, I mean, we could talk, but the brain science is there. The brain science is there. The evidence there is from faiths, from Christianity, from whatever, like being grateful for something beyond yourself. It's life changing. So there's a reason why I start with that, because then I can see what the person's grateful for. And also, I was explaining this to someone the other day that I'm training to be a coach. They want to have a coaching practice. It lets me see what they're grateful for and what they value. So gratitude actually is by seeing what folk are grateful for and listening and observing what folk are grateful for, then you can see a deeper meaning of their values, what it means to them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think when you're tapping into that, it brings me back to our conversation around like the external validation piece too, right? And trying to be neutral with that. People are praising us, and then a lot of people can be negative towards us, especially if we're trying to change, because heuristics, they have an idea of who we are kind of boxed up in their mind. And then when we try and change that, that can be a very difficult for some people to take. So like, for example, if you're doing the podcast, I've had people say to me, like, why are you doing a podcast? That's so weird. Like, leave that to the people on social media. You meet this resistance. I think you meet most resistance within yourself too, right? I think you have these negative spirals, you have these thought distortions. You might think you're not good enough, or why me? I'm curious, like, what role does hope play in helping someone who is stuck in self-limiting belief?
Yeah. Yeah. Self-limiting belief is the thing that holds us back. There's a great book called The Big Leap. So Gay Hendricks, the guy that wrote it, he's a great coach. And it's being able to make that leap and understand that. So for me, what I hope, how it looks at practically. So I'm trying to think of an example here. So I'm at a party. I don't go to many parties nowadays, but we're at a party, like 50-year-old birthday, so it's not a mad party. And someone's there, a friend of mine, and I've been working with her a wee bit, and she's like, she wants to be an entrepreneur. And I says, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? And then she was like, oh no, you're just going to ask me a coaching question, aren't you? And I said, but there's a different way of framing that. And she's like, what? I said, you are an entrepreneur. It's like, right. And I think it's one of the biggest lies that society tells us, that we have to work towards something. So for me, there's such power and realistic hope in working from something. So you're a podcaster. I don't know if that's happened in you. Like, how long did it take for your brain to say, right, I'm a podcaster? Was it from the very first episode, or was it from a few, like for yourself?
Yeah, full transparency. I haven't said it yet.
Yeah.
Those words out loud.
I know, it's really interesting. And those words become powerful, and that power shows up in the world. So I'm, I'm a podcaster. So from the very first podcast I did, and I've done some ropey podcasts, like I've done some bad ones, like I created the worst podcast. I'm a podcaster. I created the worst podcast. So for me, it's like work from a goal, not to a goal. Start saying that you are this person. Like, and I've got a whole like way that I've worked with people who have helped us entrepreneurs, like helped someone start a cleaning business, and so you have a cleaning business. Well, we haven't any clients yet, but you have a cleaning business. They started talking like that. Now they're going to turn over, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of pounds in the cleaning business. And guess what? We have been conditioned, I hope I don't sound like a conspiracy theorist because I'm not, but it's just real. We have been conditioned that we need another accreditation. We need a training. We need a university degree. We need all this from all these big systems that make sure that, we don't inhabit that space unless we go through them. Like the internet's here. So much has been blown away. Like I've talked to someone the weekend who makes a good living just buying Nike shoes in the discount store and flipping them. Like, they probably make more than someone who's went to university for 4 years and done a degree and now sitting in a job. In fact, I know they do. Like, the world has changed. I can't say that loud enough and often enough to people. The barriers that were there for our grandparents are not there anymore. However, inside in our brain, there must come a time where you say, yeah, I'm a podcaster. And if I can do 100 podcasts, and I can just start, I'm a writer. I'm going to write my worst blog that I ever wrote. I'm a whatever. That woman, I'm an entrepreneur. Something happens in your brain. Something happens in the world. There's now something different in the world that wasn't in the world before. And that energy that we bring to the world has now been changed because you have decided that you're working from a goal, not to it.
I think the other piece to add to that too is I'm kind of fascinated by visualization, and then you can have maybe manifestation as well, kind of tied in with that. And what I see you saying is there's action steps that have to be taken with that too, right? So if I'm manifesting, if I say to myself, I'm going to be rich, or I'm going to win the lot, or I'm going to be like, that's not going to cut it, right? That's me kind of being more kind of dreaming. But if I'm visualizing, okay, I'm a podcaster now, what does a podcaster do? You do a podcast. So now I'm actually taking an action step as well. I think that's a really important point, that people don't get stuck in just think, okay, now I'm this, but you're actually not taking any actions moving towards what you want to do.
That's huge, Podge. You've just hit the nail on the head. And it comes with equal levels of accountability and creativity. So you are a podcaster, what accountability are you putting in and what creativity are you putting in? And for me, that's where coaching comes in. And I've actually got a coaching podcast with my friend called The Watering Hole. And for me, a big value for my heart is to not have an unpublished thought in my head about coaching. So I give everything away that I know about coaching. If you listen to that podcast, if you read my books, my blogs, my weekly email, you'll have enough to be a coach. Like, you will. What you do with it, it's up to you. We are in an age where we manage knowledge. So we're in an industrial age for a few hundred years, and then the computers came along. The money was in the hardware. You bought a computer and it cost a lot of money. But then it moved to the software. So the money now is in the software, where we give 10 quid to Spotify or Netflix every month. So it's in the Spotify. So project methodologies such as Scrum, learned and has been crafted from managing people's knowledge. So we're managing people's knowledge. So that's what we're doing as leaders, as entrepreneurs, managers. We manage our knowledge and other people's, because the machines are taking over everything else. That is why in this age you see a rise in coaching, because what you're doing is helping manage someone else's knowledge. Like, if I had to say one thing to someone in today's age, would be either formally or informally have a coaching relationship with someone, because I think it's one of the superpowers that we have. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a coach, because whoever's listening to that, I mean, never work with you, whatever. I'm busy enough, but like, have at least an informal relationship with a friend or someone you trust that can ask you coaching questions about something that you would love to change in your life. Coaching is always future focused. And what you've just said, building in some sort of action steps, happens when you have a coaching relationship. What's wrong? What would you like to talk about? What particular part of that would you like to talk about? What would you like to be different about that issue? And where do you want to start? Those 4 questions is my coaching framework. You take those 4 questions, you can coach anybody. I've done it in front of like hundreds of people. Like, I need you. Sometimes I go, Mark, would you just so I've done it. Like, I've done it with a doctor one time in this university, and this young lady, she was doing a medicine program, so she came up the front, the hall, and like, within those 4 questions, she realized that she didn't want to be a doctor. She was only on the course because of her parents, like, in front of hundreds of people. Just those 4 questions. That part of accountability and creativity and being in a coaching relationship with someone else is so cool. And just lastly, you'll know it yourself. There's someone in your life, if you're listening to this, there's someone in your life that you really love hanging out about. hanging out with. Maybe it's a relation, maybe it's a work colleague, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone from the sports club, where you're just with them. The energy's good and you like it because they recognize you, they notice you, and you show up in the world. They let you show up in the world and make you feel as if you're a fully human being that matters. And that's the person that you probably want to be saying, hey, could we meet even more? Because I want to keep trying to figure stuff out in my life.
I guarantee you, the people listening, myself included, there is one or two people that are just like popping into your brain when you said that. Like we know who that person is as well.
I know, I know, I know. So reach out to them for a cup of tea. In Ireland, everything we do is over a cup of tea, isn't it? You know.
You said you were in. Where did you say? Did you say Gambia? And you had the lady brought you in for a cup of tea as well. So it extends beyond Ireland, which is pretty
I
cool.
know, I know. Well, just the power of I think I've wrote about that a few times. The power of a cup of tea, of bringing people around and having conversations. And I talk about an unholy trinity. So we have an unholy trinity. It's not the holy. The unholy trinity in our life is fear, guilt, and shame. So we don't have enough. We're not doing enough, and we aren't enough. That's the message the world sends us through advertisements. That's the message, the education system sends us. You need more university, you need this. Instagram says do this course, and you don't have enough, you're not enough, and you're not doing enough. When your brain starts to turn that holy trinity of fear, guilt, and shame, you start turning that to the positive, like your life changes. Like your life changes. And if you're thinking, what's he talking about? Go and read the autobiography of someone that you admire. There was a moment where they realized there wasn't a moment where they changed, because there's always going to be days where you're going to get up and go, I feel like crap. And I do a lot of that in my coaching. I'll say to people, you're going to get up and you won't have any hope some days. And it's as enough as you can just to like stand up straight, because so many of us are dealing with so much stuff. And that's where you have to be kind to yourself. That's where you have to work from your energy. That's where you have to know today's maybe just a Netflix day. Today's maybe just going to be a day where you're just going to try and get through it. You can't go at full revs every day. But when we start knowing that we have the power and ability to change from the fear and the guilt and the shame, and also we could go deep into this because I'm really fascinated about the fear, the guilt, and the shame is always from outside of us. It's been gathered up. We've gathered it up over the years. We've got it from school. We've got it from parents. We've got it from society. We've got it from politicians. We've got all this stuff, and it's as a wee baby, we're not born with any of that. All our belief systems are actually gave to us as we go through life. So if you can get into relationships that help shape your belief systems, things are going to be different.
Mark, what makes you hopeful right now, either in the world or the work that you're doing?
Great question.
It's all doom and gloom, no hope.
I'm just like the eternal optimist. I think AI is going to replace a lot of work that's going to free us up to do things. I just think that we're going to come into a time. Yeah. So in the very small in Podge and Mark's life, and whoever's listening to this, 99.9% of our interactions with people today will be good. You'll notice it. If you go to a shop, someone, how's it going? How you doing? You'll notice it. God forbid you're in a hospital, you see those nurses and doctors, the most incredible. You'll see goodness all over the world. So that goodness is all there. You'll see nature. You'll see how this time of the year, spring's starting to come. You can see the hope of spring coming, which I think is a great analogy for life. And I think we have, as a species, we've survived so much. We've survived so much, famines, wars, and everything else, and we will keep surviving. And I think there's a guy called David Brooks, the social animal. It's a great sociology book, and he says they did an experiment with 3-year-olds, and they showed them a picture of someone climbing up a hill or something, and some people were trying to help them, and some people were trying to not help them. And he says that the 3-year-olds had a tendency, well, I'm trying to think of the word, but basically the 3-year-olds noticed from the 3-year-olds that they admired the helper. The helper was the one they were drawn to. So I think we as human beings, we want to help each other. We always want to help each other. And that's what gives me hope. That at the base of who we are really good people. We will see peace in Ukraine. We will see peace. We will see light coming through. We will see things happening. But also we need to micro responsibility. We need to take individual responsibility for that. Like, we just need to know that we all play a part, even though sometimes we feel we're not. I use another analogy, and I think in the book and a few times so we had a big storm. Remember we had that, what was it called a few weeks ago? Like 100.
There's
What was
so
that?
many names now.
It was rough, wasn't it? Like there's still trees. Like it was the worst storm for 100 years or something. So for me, I've lived in the north coast of Ireland, and after a storm, I always used to love going down to the beach. And a storm like changes a beach, and it causes a lot of stuff to happen. But when I went to the beach, I didn't look for the chaos and disruption. I looked for the new beach, because after every storm, there's always a new beach. My encouragement for you, for anybody listening to this, is like, whatever's happening in your life, look for the new beach. There's a new beach there. There's new opportunity. There's new beauty. There's new ways of being. And I think the hope for me always comes back to three things: kindness, generosity, and empathy. If that can be our default, it's in the micro, it's just individuals in our tribes, in our countries, in the world, that we can keep making this world a better place for us all.
If someone listening to this is in a place where hope feels really far off, like what's one small step they could take to move towards it?
I think there's something, I mean, there's just something spiritual and emotional, isn't there? Where if you're listening to this and you're just like, can't cope, just take some time out. Take time out to breathe. Just take time out to think, go for a walk, and just reach out to someone else. Just reach out to someone you trust. Just have a conversation. You ever watch that film Into the Wild, where the guy goes into the wild and to seek a better life in America, and he ends up in the bus in Alaska? It's quite a famous film, and unfortunately he dies in the bus. But the last thing he does, he just wandered away from people his whole life, although he was just a young fella. He writes at the last of it, happiness is shared. Just find a way that you can reach out to someone. If it's just even a phone call, a helpline, but there's no one in your life, but just have a conversation with someone else. There's something happens when we get with another human being. It just helps us. And also just start thinking, like, where are people in my life that can give me hope? Like, what can I do? Maybe get out. And we were just talking before we came online about, we both work really completely hybrid now. And it's great working hybrid, and I'm able to do so much more stuff, but sometimes it can get a bit lonely, So I have to face myself and go to the gym and do stuff with other people. Like spiritually as well, whatever your background is, pray. Prayer is a huge thing to help us, meditate, whatever it is, just calm your mind,
Yeah, I think the idea of reaching out and being connected with someone is really, really good advice. And the remote one is interesting, right? I've had a lot of meetings, like this one might even be an example, right? When we finish up here today, I'm going to click out a Zoom, and next thing is going to be swoosh, like pure just silence. And depending on the conversation you have, like this one will fill me with gratitude, like not have reflection. But there's other times too, it's just like weird. You're kind of warping into a different world, and it can be lonely. Like you said, it can get lonely and isolating sometimes. So just making sure you have those connections or people that you want in your life that are around you.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark, as we wind down, where can people find you or connect with you?
Healthyrhythms.org. You can see my website. It's probably not the best website in the world. I've never really timed it, but my website's okay. And then I've got the podcasts, and then Instagram or whatever, or LinkedIn, and just, if you want to chat, just reach out to me. I love coaching. I'm a coach. I also teach on coaching. I'm a adjunct professor at a couple of places. I write and coaching and change management. So I'm a bit of a nerd around change. But my heart is just people. I love helping people thrive. I love helping people, and I love doing it in a way that no one else knows I'm involved. So if you want to even reach out to me for a chat sometime, just find me. And, I'm always having a few chats every week, just randomly with people who just want to chat.
Yeah, I'll link all of the links to your website and to your social accounts as well in the when the posts go out for this podcast. Mark, thank you so much. That was an unbelievably good conversation. I appreciate the work that you're doing and your time for jumping on today.
Brilliant, Podge. Thank you. Thanks
Right.
for everything you're doing. Keep going.
Thanks, folks. Take care.